Rich rancher took his twins begging for food, acted poor, then she did the unthinkable. On a bitter winter night, a man in rags leads his hungry children to a church door. The bell tolls, snow drifts, and desperation shows in their eyes. A widow poorer than them offers her last loaf of bread, not knowing the truth, because this so-called drifter isn't poor at all. He's one of the richest ranchers in the county, hiding his wealth, testing the mercy of strangers. But what happens next shatters every expectation. This widow doesn't just give food, she gives her home, her bed, and her trust. And when she discovers his secret, the whole town turns against them both. Now whispers of scandal mix with the thunder of hooves, and a ruthless railroad moves in to steal the very water their lives depend on. One act of unthinkable kindness lit the fire, but will it end in redemption or ruin? What happens when pride, faith, and survival collide on the unforgiving frontier? Before we begin, I invite you to take a breath. This space is for the quiet believers, the ones who know small kindnesses can ripple into something greater. The bitter Colorado wind rattled the thin window panes of Mary Ellen's cabin as she stirred the remnants of her venison stew. The tin spoon scraped against the pot's bottom, the sound mixing with the whistle of winter air finding its way through the cabin's aging logs. Her own stomach growled, but she pushed the thought aside as she watched the two children huddled near her small potbelly stove. Their faces glowed in the dancing firelight, hollow cheeks warming to a healthier pink as they spooned up every precious bite. The boy Daniel, he'd said his name was, had already finished his portion and was eyeing the bottom of his bowl as if willing more stew to appear. His sister Rebecca's golden braids caught the lamplight as she carefully soaked up the last bits of broth with a corner of cornbread. Their father, Joshua, sat straight-backed in her husband's old chair, his own bowl barely touched. "Ma'am," he said softly, "we're much obliged for your kindness." His voice carried an educated tone that didn't match his worn clothing. But Mary Ellen had learned long ago not to judge those who came seeking help. "The Lord provides," she answered simply, though her pantry told a different story. Tomorrow's soup line would be thinner than ever, but she couldn't bear to see children go hungry. Not when she remembered all too well the hollow ache of want during those first hard months after Thomas passed. The twins' eyelids were growing heavy, their small bodies swaying with exhaustion. Mary Ellen gathered up her treasured quilts, one pieced by her mother, the other a wedding gift, and led them to the curtained alcove where her husband's bed still stood. "You'll sleep here tonight," she said, tucking the covers around their thin shoulders. "It's too cold to be anywhere else." Rebecca's small hand caught hers. "Will you sing us a hymn? Mama used to before." Mary Ellen's throat tightened, but she managed a gentle smile. "Of course, dear heart." She settled on the edge of the bed and began to sing softly. Amazing Grace, how sweet the sound. Her clear voice filled the small cabin with warmth that seemed to push back the winter's chill. By the second verse, both children were asleep, their faces peaceful in the low light. Mary Ellen drew the curtain closed and returned to find Joshua still at her table, his shoulders bowed under the weight of something heavier than his ragged coat. "They lost their mother 3 years ago," he said quietly, staring into his cooling stew. "I've done my best, but children need more than bread alone," Mary Ellen replied, gathering up the empty bowls. She'd learned that lesson well in her schoolhouse days. Sometimes they need a mother's touch. Joshua's weather-worn hands tightened around his bowl. "Yes, ma'am, that they do." The wind howled louder, rattling the cabin's door. Mary Ellen stoked the stove with her dwindling supply of firewood, then settled at her small table with her Bible. The leather cover was worn smooth by years of handling, its pages marked with her own notes and prayers. In the margin of Proverbs, beside the verses about giving to those in need, she dipped her pen in ink and wrote by lamplight. Kindness always costs something, yet must be given. She glanced at the curtained alcove where the twins slept, then at their father's bowed head. "The Lord knows our needs," she added softly, "even before we speak them." Joshua looked up then, and in the lamplight she caught something in his eyes, not just shame and gratitude, but a deeper pain, as if her simple acts of mercy had struck some chord he'd thought long silent. "Thank you," he whispered, the words barely audible above the wind's moan. Mary Ellen nodded, closing her Bible carefully. Her own portion of stew might have been given away, but she felt oddly full, not with food perhaps, but with the certainty that she'd done right. Tomorrow would bring its own concerns, but for tonight she had followed her heart's leading. And somehow she knew that would be enough. The lamp's flame flickered low as the night deepened, casting long shadows across her cabin's wooden floor. Outside, the winter wind continued its lonely song across the Colorado plains, but inside, 4 souls found shelter in the warmth of unexpected kindness. Morning sunlight crept through the frost-etched windows of Mary Ellen's cabin, painting delicate patterns across the worn floorboards. The aroma of precious coffee filled the small space as she carefully measured out the last of her grounds into the battered pot. Each spoonful was a sacrifice from her dwindling stores, but hospitality demanded no less. Rebecca and Daniel sat cross-legged on the floor, delighting in the antics of Mary Ellen's orange tabby cat as it batted playfully at their bootlaces. Their laughter, bright and clear as spring water, made the cabin seem warmer somehow. "Look how he pounces," Rebecca giggled, wiggling her foot as the cat crouched low. "Just like a mountain lion," Daniel added, his eyes sparkling with mischief. The father sat at the table, his shoulders tense despite the cheerful scene. Joshua's fingers drummed an uneven rhythm on the tabletop, his expression distant as if wrestling with some hidden burden. Mary Ellen set out 4 tin cups and poured the steaming coffee, saving a splash of milk for the children's portions. "It's not much," she apologized, setting out the last heel of yesterday's bread, "but you're welcome to share what I have." "You've done more than enough," Joshua said, his voice rough with emotion. He cleared his throat. "If you'll permit me, I'd like to repay your kindness. I noticed your woodpile's running low." "That's kind of you to offer," Mary Ellen replied, though pride made her hesitate. Since Thomas's passing, she'd learned to manage on her own. Still, with winter's grip tightening, she couldn't afford to refuse help. After breakfast, Joshua headed outside with her old axe while Mary Ellen tidied up. The steady thunk of splitting wood carried through the walls, a reassuring sound of honest work. Her thoughts were interrupted by a sharp knock at the door. Sarah Miller, her closest neighbor, stood on the stoop wearing a concerned frown. "Mary Ellen, I saw smoke from your chimney awful early. Everything all right?" "Just offering shelter to some folks down on their luck," Mary Ellen explained, stepping onto the porch. Sarah's frown deepened. "You can't be taking in every drifter that comes through town. It ain't safe for a widow alone." She lowered her voice. "What do you really know about these people?" "I know they were hungry," Mary Ellen said firmly. "That's enough for me to know." By afternoon, her larder needed restocking. Mary Ellen walked with Joshua to Jensen's Mercantile, her basket light, with the few coins she could spare. The bell above the door chimed as they entered, and the usual busy chatter of shoppers suddenly hushed. "Why, if it ain't Joshua Rollins!" Old Mr. Jensen called out, his eyes wide with recognition. "Didn't expect to see you on this end of town." Mary Ellen froze, her hand tightening on her basket handle. Joshua Rollins, the cattle baron whose spread dominated the North Valley? The man whose fence rider she'd seen passing through town on fine horses, whose name was spoken with respect in county business. Whispers rippled through the store like wind through prairie grass. Rollins in those rags, playing at being poor. That widow took him in. Heat flooded Mary Ellen's cheeks as understanding dawned. Every kind word, every shared meal, every moment of genuine concern. Had it all been some wealthy man's game? She set down her basket without selecting a single item and walked out, her back straight despite the humiliation burning in her chest. The afternoon passed in a blur of hurt and confusion. As the sun settled toward the mountains, Joshua returned. From stacking wood, his borrowed axe over his shoulder, Mary Ellen met him at the door, her voice steady despite her turmoil. "Were you enjoying yourself, Mr. Rollins? Watching me share my last bit of stew, thinking I was helping the poor?" Joshua's face fell. "Ma'am, I can explain. I'd surely appreciate that explanation." She cut in, years of schoolteacher authority sharpening her tone. "Because from where I stand, you made a mockery of Christian charity. I wanted my children to understand true generosity," he said quietly. "To see how people with nearly nothing still manage to give. They're growing up with too much, not knowing the value. So you used me to teach them a lesson?" Mary Ellen's voice cracked. "Made me an unwitting player in your little drama?" The twins appeared in the doorway, their young faces confused and troubled. Mary Ellen's heart ached for them, but the sting of betrayal was too fresh. "I want you gone by morning light," she said firmly. "All of you. I may not have much, Mr. Rollins, but I do have my dignity." Joshua opened his mouth as if to protest, then closed it. He nodded once, sharply, and turned to gather his children. The sun sank behind the mountains, painting the snow-covered yard in shades of rose and gold. But Mary Ellen felt only the cold seeping into her bones. The pale winter sun crept over the eastern horizon, painting the snow-covered ground in shades of pink and gold. Joshua Rollins stood beside his hidden wagon, his breath forming clouds in the frigid morning air as he hitched the team of horses. The familiar motions felt heavy today, weighted by shame and regret. Rebecca and Daniel trudged through the crusty snow behind him, their small boots leaving twin trails from Mary Ellen's cabin. Every few steps, they turned to look back at the modest dwelling where warmth and kindness had sheltered them. The chimney still puffed thin wisps of smoke into the dawn sky. "Papa," Rebecca said softly, clutching her brother's hand, "why can't we say goodbye to Miss Whitford?" Joshua's hands stilled on the leather harness. "Sometimes, darling, grown folks need time to think on things." He couldn't meet his daughter's questioning gaze. "Miss Whitford has given us more than enough already." The twins climbed into the wagon bed, huddling together under the wool blankets they'd brought from home. Joshua clicked his tongue, and the horses moved forward, their hooves breaking through the snow's crystalline crust. With each step away from Mary Ellen's cabin, his heart grew heavier. Along the road toward his ranch, Joshua wrestled with his conscience. Several times he nearly turned the team around, the words of explanation burning in his throat. But pride, that old familiar devil, kept him moving forward. What could he say that wouldn't sound like excuses? How could he justify using her genuine kindness as a lesson for his children? Miles passed beneath the wagon wheels. The morning sun climbed higher, but its light brought little warmth to the frost-bound landscape or Joshua's troubled spirit. Back in town, Mary Ellen threw herself into her work, grateful for the distraction of teaching. In her small classroom, borrowed from the church, she guided 3 children through their letters and numbers. The scratch of chalk against slate filled the air, along with the occasional crackle from the pot-bellied stove in the corner. "Very good, Sarah," she praised, though her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. "Your penmanship is improving." During the noon meal break, Mary Ellen couldn't help overhearing the conversation between 2 women passing by the schoolhouse window. "Can you imagine," one whispered, not quietly enough, "Joshua Rollins with all his cattle and fine horses, playing at being poor, and her taking him in like some charity case?" "Bless her heart," the other replied with a laugh. "She must feel quite the fool now." Mary Ellen's cheeks burned, but she held her head high. Still, the words stung, adding to the hollow ache in her chest. As evening approached and she was gathering her teaching materials, Reverend Thompson's measured footsteps echoed through the empty schoolroom. The elderly preacher's kind eyes crinkled with concern as he took in her drawn face. "Sister Mary Ellen," he said gently, settling into one of the children's small chairs. "I've been thinking about you today. Have you come to tell me I was too trusting, Reverend?" She tried to keep the bitterness from her voice. "No, child." He folded his weathered hands in his lap. "I've come to remind you that charity given in faith is never wasted. The Lord sees the heart behind the giving, not the worthiness of those who receive." Mary Ellen's eyes filled with unexpected tears. "I felt so foolish when I learned the truth." "Perhaps," the Reverend suggested carefully, "there's more truth yet to be learned." Across the frozen miles, in his sprawling ranch house, Joshua sat before a blazing hearth. The flames cast dancing shadows on the fine furnishings around him. All the trappings of wealth that now seemed to mock his recent deception. Rebecca and Daniel lay on their stomachs before the fire, paper and pencils spread before them. Their small hands moved busily across the pages, drawing with intense concentration. "What are you creating there?" Joshua asked, trying to shake off his melancholy. "It's Miss Whitford," Daniel answered, not looking up from his work. "See? That's her giving us soup." Rebecca held up her own drawing. "And here she is, tucking us in with her special quilt. The one with the stars on it." Joshua's throat tightened as he studied their pictures. His children had captured more than just Mary Ellen's appearance. They'd drawn the gentleness in her eyes, the warmth of her smile. In their simple sketches, he saw what he'd been too proud to acknowledge. They loved her. The fire popped and sparked as Joshua stared into its depths, his children's drawings etched in his mind. As the night deepened around the ranch house, he came to a decision that both terrified and relieved him. Somehow he would have to win back Mary Ellen's trust. Not with clever schemes or object lessons, but with simple, unvarnished truth. He owed her that much. Perhaps he owed her even more. 2 days after leaving Mary Ellen's cabin, Joshua Rawlins guided his horse through the snowy streets of town. Fresh powder clung to his heavy wool coat, and his mount's hooves left deep prints in the fresh drifts. The late morning sun did little to warm the bitter air as he approached the white-painted church that doubled as the town schoolhouse through frosted window panes. He could see Mary Ellen at the front of the room, pointing to letters chalked on a slate board. Her simple brown dress and white apron spoke of careful mending, but she carried herself with quiet dignity. Joshua dismounted, tethered his horse, and slipped inside, settling onto a back bench as quietly as his boots would allow. Mary Ellen's shoulders stiffened at his entrance, but she continued her lesson without pause. "Now, children, what sound does this letter make when paired with Akka?" Her clear voice carried through the room as several small hands shot up eagerly. Joshua watched as she guided her students through their reading lessons with patience and skill. The hours crawled by until at last she rang the small brass bell on her desk. "Class dismissed," she called. "Remember to practice your letters at home." The children gathered their slates and wrapped themselves in woolen scarves and mittens. Soon their voices faded into the snowy afternoon. Leaving Joshua alone with Mary Ellen in the hushed schoolroom, she busied herself straightening papers, her back turned to him. "Mr. Rawlins," she said coolly, "I trust you haven't come to play any more games." Joshua removed his hat, turning it nervously in his hands. "No, ma'am," he replied. "I've come to explain myself, if you'll hear me out." Mary Ellen finally turned to face him, her expression guarded. "Speak your piece, then." "I wanted my children to understand true poverty," he began, the words coming slowly. "To see how folks live when they ain't blessed with plenty. But watching your generosity that night, seeing you share your last meal without hesitation." He paused, swallowing hard. "Well, it humbled me more than anything has in years." "You could have simply told me the truth," Mary Ellen said, but some of the ice had melted from her tone. "Pride's a stubborn thing, ma'am, but I aim to make it right." Joshua straightened his shoulders. I'd like to offer you work tutoring Rebecca and Daniel. They need proper schooling, and they took to you right quick. I'll pay you fair wages." Mary Ellen's hand stilled on her papers. The offer tempted her. Her flour barrel was nearly empty, and her woodpile had dwindled dangerously low. Yet the memory of townspeople's whispers made her hesitate. "The gossip's been cruel enough already," she said softly. "Let them talk," Joshua replied. "You'd be doing honest work, nothing more." "I'll need to pray on it," she said firmly. "Come back tomorrow at dawn for my answer." That evening, Mary Ellen knelt beside her narrow bed, the lamp's flame casting shadows on the cabin walls. She poured out her heart in prayer, asking for guidance. As she rose from her knees, a deep sense of peace settled over her. The decision felt right, despite her lingering weariness. When Joshua returned the next morning, frost glittering on his coat, Mary Ellen met him at her door with quiet resolve. "I accept your offer," she said, "but I have one condition. I must be treated with dignity. No more deceptions." Relief crossed Joshua's face. "You have my word, Miss Whitford. Shall we leave now? I've brought the wagon." Mary Ellen gathered her teaching materials and a small carpet bag with necessities. The wagon waited outside, its bed lined with fresh straw and warm blankets. Joshua helped her up onto the seat with careful courtesy, then climbed up beside her. As they drove out of town, the mountains loomed ahead, their peaks shrouded in heavy gray clouds. The wagon wheels creaked through fresh snow, and their breath formed white clouds in the winter air. Few words passed between them during the journey. Mary Ellen sat straight-backed, her hands folded in her lap, while Joshua kept his attention. On the team of horses. Yet beneath the awkward silence lay something unspoken, a fragile possibility of trust rebuilding, of wounds beginning to heal. The twins' eager faces appeared in Mary Ellen's mind, warming her heart despite the chill. Perhaps, she thought, this new chapter would bring blessings she couldn't yet imagine. The wagon rolled onward through the pristine landscape, carrying them toward Joshua's sprawling ranch and whatever tomorrow might bring. The wagon crested the final hill, revealing the sprawling Rawlins ranch below. Mary Ellen's breath caught at the sight. 3 wide barns stood in neat rows, their red paint bright against the snow. Cattle pens stretched into the distance, and a well-maintained bunkhouse sat apart from the main house, a stately 2-story structure that made her cabin look like a matchbox. Several ranch hands paused in their work as Joshua guided the wagon into the yard. Their curious glances and whispered conversations didn't escape Mary Ellen's notice. She held her head high, reminding herself she was here as a teacher, nothing more. "Miss Whitford's here." Rebecca's voice rang out across the yard. The twins burst from the house, their boots kicking up snow as they raced to the wagon. Daniel reached up, offering his small hand to help her down. "We want to show you everything." Rebecca bounced on her toes, while Daniel tugged at Mary Ellen's sleeve. "Especially our room, we cleaned it special." Joshua's lips twitched with amusement. "Let Miss Whitford get settled first," he said, but the twins were already pulling her toward the house. Their room was indeed spotless, with 2 narrow beds sporting matching quilts and a shelf of well-worn books. Rebecca proudly showed off her collection of hair ribbons, while Daniel presented his prized set of carved wooden animals. "Papa made them," he explained, placing a tiny horse in Mary Ellen's palm. "But he doesn't have much time for carving anymore." By late afternoon, Mary Ellen had established herself at the kitchen table with the twins, primers and slates spread before them. Their eager minds absorbed her lessons quickly, and their laughter echoed through the house as she turned arithmetic into a game. Joshua found himself pausing in his work more often than usual, drawn to the kitchen doorway by the sounds of happiness within. He watched quietly as Mary Ellen guided Rebecca's hand through the proper formation of letters, her patience seemingly endless. When Daniel struggled with a sum, she used dried beans to help him count, praising his persistence until his face lit up with understanding. The kitchen filled with savory aromas as the ranch cook prepared supper. Around the table, Mary Ellen captivated her audience with tales of frontier life stories of brave settlers, clever solutions to harsh conditions, and the importance of helping neighbors. "My pal once traded his best hunting knife for medicine when our neighbor's child fell ill," she recalled, her voice warm with memory. "He said no blade was worth more than a life." Even Joshua found himself smiling at her stories, the usual stern set of his shoulders relaxing. After supper, one of the ranch hands, a weather-beaten man named Tom, approached Mary Ellen hesitantly. "Ma'am," he said, twisting his hat in his hands, "I heard tell you help folks with their letters sometimes?" "Of course," she replied kindly. In the lamplight of the sitting room, she helped him compose a letter to his family back east, her neat handwriting filling the page with his carefully chosen words. The gratitude in his eyes when she finished was payment enough. As evening settled over the ranch, Mary Ellen gathered the twins for their bedtime routine. "Shall we sing a hymn before prayers?" she suggested, and their faces brightened. Soon, their young voices joined hers in sweet hour of prayer, the familiar melody floating through the house. Joshua stood in the doorway, watching as she knelt between their beds. The twins folded their hands automatically, following her lead, in a simple prayer of gratitude for the day's blessings. Something tight in his chest loosened at the sight. How long had it been since his home held such peace? Later, in the comfortable guest room Joshua had prepared, Mary Ellen stood at the window. Moonlight silvered the snowy yard, and a lone coyote's call echoed in the distance. Her reflection in the glass showed a woman changed from the one who'd left town that morning, more purposeful. Somehow. The twins' sweet faces rose in her mind, along with their eager questions and trustful gazes. Teaching had always been her calling, but this felt different, more personal, more vital. Yet even as warmth filled her heart, she couldn't quite silence the whispers of doubt. What were the townspeople saying about her now? Would this decision cost her the respect she'd worked so hard to maintain? She touched the cross at her throat, a habit from childhood. Purpose had found her again, bringing unexpected joy. But as she prepared for bed, she couldn't help wondering what challenges tomorrow might bring to this newfound peace. Morning light crept across the Rollins ranch, painting frost patterns on the kitchen windows. Smoke rose in lazy spirals from the bunkhouse chimneys, carrying the scent of coffee and wood fire into the crisp air. Inside the warm kitchen, Mary Ellen arranged dried beans in neat rows across the table while Rebecca and Daniel settled into their lessons. "Now then," she said, sliding 10 beans toward Daniel, "if we take away 3, how many remain?" His small fingers moved carefully, counting each one before answering. Rebecca bent over her slate, practicing her letters with determined focus. The twins took turns reading from the Book of Psalms, their young voices growing more confident with each verse. Mary Ellen guided them gently through the difficult words, praising their efforts. From his study doorway, Joshua watched the scene unfold, noting how naturally his children responded to her quiet authority. Later that morning, while the twins worked on their writing, Joshua drew Mary Ellen aside. "I'd value your thoughts on the children," he said, his voice low. "You've a teacher's eye for character." Mary Ellen considered carefully before answering. "They're gentle souls, Mr. Rollins, eager to learn and quick to show kindness." She paused, then added softly, "But they hunger for more than knowledge. They light up whenever you enter the room. They crave your presence more than any wealth could satisfy." Joshua's expression softened at her words, though he said nothing in response. Instead, he mentioned needing supplies from town and asked if she would accompany him on the sleigh ride. Mary Ellen agreed, knowing her own pantry needed restocking as well. The afternoon sun gleamed on the snow as Joshua helped Mary Ellen into the sleigh, tucking warm blankets around them both. The twins waved from the porch, their faces bright with smiles. Bells jingled merrily as the horses drew them toward town. Their breath-forming clouds in the winter air dotted the mercantile. Whispers followed Mary Ellen like shadows. She pretended not to notice the sideways glances and hushed conversations, but each barbed word found its mark. Two men by the feed sack spoke loud enough to be heard. Widow Whitford sure landed on her feet, probably had her eye on Rawlins's. Money all along. A cluster of women near the fabric counter barely bothered to lower their voices. Using charity to climb above her station, one said with a sniff. Acting the saint to catch herself a rich husband. Mary Ellen's cheeks burned, but she held her head high, selecting her purchases with steady hands. Joshua's jaw tightened as he caught the undertones of malice, watching her endure the subtle cruelty with dignity. On the ride home, snow began to fall in lazy spirals. Joshua finally broke the silence. "Do you regret accepting the position? The gossip is not unkind." Mary Ellen drew the blanket closer, choosing her words with care. "The whispers wound me, I won't pretend otherwise. But I won't abandon the twins to protect my reputation. They deserve more than that." Joshua studied her profile in the fading light, noting the quiet strength in her features. "You're a brave woman, Mary Ellen Whitford." Evening settled over the ranch like a purple cloak. In the dining room, ranch hands gathered at the long table, sharing bowls of steaming stew. Mary Ellen sat among them, asking Tom about his family back east and listening as young Jim described his sister's new baby. The men's initial awkwardness melted away under her genuine interest in their lives. "Much obliged for helping with that letter, ma'am," Tom said, passing her the cornbread. "My mother wrote back right quick, said it was the finest letter she'd had in years." Others added their own words of appreciation, respect evident in their tone. Mary Ellen realized these rough men had become unexpected allies. They're honest. Regard a balm against town gossip. As night drew its curtain across the sky, Mary Ellen knelt beside her bed, hands clasped in prayer. The day's hurts and triumphs spilled out in whispered words as she entrusted her reputation to God's keeping. Outside her window, snow continued to fall, covering the ranch in pristine white, as if suggesting that tomorrow might bring a fresh start, unmarked by today's trials. She thought of the twins' eager faces, of Joshua's growing respect, of the ranch hand's simple kindness. These, she decided, were worth far more than the good opinion of gossips. With that certainty warming her heart, she rose from her prayers, ready to face whatever challenges tomorrow might bring. Morning dawned clear and cold over the Rawlins ranch. Joshua stood at the kitchen door, adjusting his heavy coat. "Miss Whitford, would you care to join me checking the cattle along Cedar Creek? The twins are eager to come along." Mary Ellen looked up from clearing breakfast dishes, surprised by the invitation. "I'd be glad to, though I'm not dressed for riding." "Sarah in the bunkhouse has spare gear you can borrow," Joshua said, a slight smile touching his weathered face. Within the hour, Mary Ellen emerged wearing borrowed wool pants under her skirt, thick boots, and a sheepskin coat. The twins bounced with excitement as Tom, one of the senior ranch hands, helped them mount his steady day horse. They would ride double with him, their small faces bright with anticipation. Joshua brought Mary Ellen's horse forward, a gentle mare with a smooth gait. He cupped his hands to help her mount, his touch careful and respectful. The four riders set out across the snow-covered pasture, hooves crunching through the frozen crust. The winter sun cast long shadows as they rode, their breath forming clouds in the crisp air. Joshua led them along Cedar Creek, where ice stretched like curved glass over the water. He reined his horse to a stop near a frozen water hole, his expression concerned. "These holes worry me," he said, gesturing at the thick ice. "When spring melt comes, the creek could flood. Last year we lost 2 calves to high water." He pointed upstream where fallen logs had created a natural dam. "If that breaks loose during the thaw." Mary Ellen studied the creek bed, listening thoughtfully. "The Lord provides if we're wise stewards," she said after a moment. "Perhaps we could clear those logs before the thaw. And the ranch hands might help dig channels to direct the spring runoff." Joshua turned to her, surprised by her practical suggestion. "You understand ranching better than I expected, Miss Whitford." "I've learned to see God's hand in all things," she replied simply. "Even frozen creeks and spring floods." The twins' laughter carried on the wind as Tom showed them tracks in the snow rabbit, deer, and coyote signs marking the white surface. Their joy seemed to lighten the winter landscape. Back at the ranch, Mary Ellen joined Mrs. Cooper in the kitchen. The cook welcomed her help with the evening meal, showing her where to find cornmeal and buttermilk for bread. Soon the kitchen filled with warm scents and friendly conversation. Mary Ellen's attempts at shaping perfectly round cornbread pones drew chuckles from Mrs. Cooper. "Land sakes, child," the cook laughed. "They'll taste just fine whether they're round or square." After supper, Mary Ellen gathered the twins for their evening lessons. They worked on their letters by lamplight, the room cozy despite winter pressing against the windows. Rebecca looked up from her slate, eyes hopeful. "Miss Whitford, will you sing for us, please?" Mary Ellen hesitated, then smiled. "Very well. Do you know Amazing Grace?" She began softly, her clear voice filling the room with familiar words. On the second verse, Joshua's deep baritone joined from where he sat by the fire. The twins added their small voices, creating a sweet harmony that seemed to warm the very air. Mary Ellen felt her heart swell at the simple beauty of the moment. Four voices raised together like a family should be. Later, after the twins were tucked into bed, Mary Ellen stepped onto the porch to gaze at the stars. Joshua joined her, offering a warm shawl against the night air. "You have such peace about you," he said quietly. "I envy that. All my cattle and land don't bring the same contentment I see in your eyes." Mary Ellen wrapped the shawl closer, considering her words carefully. "Peace isn't purchased, Mr. Rollins. It's chosen daily, like faith itself. It comes from trusting God's providence, even when the path ahead seems uncertain." His eyes held hers for a long moment, thoughtful and warm. "You've taught me more than just letters and numbers, Miss Whitford." Mary Ellen felt heat rise in her cheeks, grateful for the darkness that hid her blush. His kindness stirred feelings she hadn't expected, hadn't wanted to expect. She reminded herself firmly that a wealthy rancher like Joshua Rollins wouldn't seriously consider a poor widow, no matter how well she taught his children. "Good night, Mr. Rollins," she said softly, turning toward the door. "Thank you for including me today." "The pleasure was mine," he replied, his voice gentle in the starlit darkness dotting her room. Mary Ellen tried to quiet her fluttering heart. She would not let herself hope for more than the friendship and respect she'd earned. Still, as she prepared for bed, the memory of their shared song lingered like a warm promise in her mind. Sunday morning painted the Colorado landscape in crystalline frost. The sun's weak rays caught ice crystals hanging from the ranch house eaves, making them sparkle like diamonds. Inside, Mary Ellen smoothed her best black dress, conscious of its worn edges but grateful for its dignity. The twins bounded down the stairs in their Sunday finest, their faces scrubbed pink and hair neatly combed. Rebecca twirled in her blue wool dress while Daniel tugged at his starched collar. "Miss Whitford, will you help with my ribbon?" Rebecca asked, holding up a length of blue silk. Mary Ellen's fingers worked deftly, tying the perfect bow. "There now, pretty as a picture." Joshua appeared in the doorway, cutting a striking figure in his dark suit and polished boots. His usual working clothes had been traded for finery that reminded everyone of his wealth and position. He cleared his throat. "The sleigh is ready. Best we head out now to make the early service." The morning air bit sharp as they settled into the sleigh, wrapped in thick buffalo robes. Joshua clicked to the horses, their bells jingling merrily as they trotted toward town. The twins huddled close to Mary Ellen, sharing warmth and excitement about seeing their friends at church. As they approached the white-painted church, Mary Ellen noticed the sideways glances and whispered conversations. Joshua guided the sleigh to a halt, helping first the children, then Mary Ellen down with careful courtesy. Heads turned as he escorted them up the church steps, his hand steady at Mary Ellen's elbow. Inside, Joshua did something that set tongues wagging. He led his small group directly to his family's regular pew and seated Mary Ellen beside him, the twins between them. The message was clear to everyone watching. Mary Ellen was under his protection and worthy of respect. When the hymns began, Mary Ellen's clear voice rose sweet and true, guiding the twins through familiar verses. Joshua watched with quiet pride as Rebecca and Daniel stood straight, singing out just as she had taught them. Even the most critical townspeople had to admit the children seemed to be thriving under her care. After the final "Amen," Councilman Porter cornered Joshua near the coat rack. His voice carried just far enough for Mary Ellen to hear. "Rollins, you need to consider your position. Having that widow living at your ranch, it's causing talk. Bad for business, bad for your standing." Joshua's shoulders stiffened, his jaw tightening dangerously. But before he could speak, Mary Ellen touched his arm gently. "Peace, Mr. Rollins," she murmured. "Some hearts take longer to soften than others." Her quiet dignity seemed to calm him. He nodded curtly to the councilman and guided his family outside to the waiting sleigh. The ride home was quieter, broken only by the twins' eager discussion of the sermon. "Pastor talked about loving your neighbor," Rebecca announced. "Like Miss Whitford did when she shared her food with us." Daniel nodded seriously. "Even when we were pretending to be poor." Mary Ellen felt Joshua's gaze on her, but kept her eyes forward, watching the snow-covered landscape glide past. Back at the ranch, heavy snow began falling as they ate their Sunday dinner. By mid-afternoon, thick white flakes obscured the corrals and delayed the evening chores. Mary Ellen settled at the kitchen table, preparing the week's lessons while the twins played checkers by the fire. As darkness fell, Joshua found her there. "Miss Whitford," he said quietly, "I want you to know something. I value your honor and good name far above any town gossip. You've brought light back to this home, something we'd been missing since their mother passed." Mary Ellen's hands stilled on her papers, touched by his words but still cautious. "Thank you, Mr. Rollins. Your support means a great deal." The evening deepened into a cozy scene. Mary Ellen reading scripture aloud by lamplight, her voice steady and soothing. Joshua sat in his leather chair, boots crossed at the ankle, listening intently as she shared verses about mercy and justice. The twins sprawled on the rug, half dozing in the warmth from the crackling fire. Snow continued falling outside, blanketing the world in pristine white. Inside, the warmth of fellowship wrapped around them like a quilt, easing their burdens. Yet even as they enjoyed this peaceful moment, Mary Ellen couldn't shake the feeling that today's confrontation at church was only the beginning of their trials. 3 days after the church service, frost painted delicate patterns across the ranch house windows. Inside, Mary Ellen sat with the twins at the kitchen table, guiding them through their arithmetic lessons. The scratch of pencils and quiet murmurs of counting filled the warm air. The thunder of hooves outside drew their attention. A rider, his horse lathered despite the cold, dismounted quickly in the yard. Joshua met him at the door, accepting a thick envelope bearing official markings. Mary Ellen watched Joshua's face darken as he read. His hands began to shake, and without warning, he slammed the document onto the oak table, making the twins jump. "Railroad claims they have rights to the creek water," he growled. "Says their surveys give them authority to redirect it for their expansion plans." Mary Ellen gathered the children's books, sending them to practice their reading in the parlor. Once they were gone, she picked up the papers, her eyes scanning the formal text. Her heart stopped when she saw the surveyor's name, Thomas Blackwood. I know this name," she said softly, her fingers tracing the signature. Mr. Blackwood did work for my Harold before he passed. They met several times about property matters. Joshua's head snapped up, his eyes narrowing. What kind of property? Matters? I'm not certain. Harold handled all the paperwork. Fear crept into her voice. He was ill near the end, his mind not always clear. What if he signed something without understanding? Joshua paced the kitchen, his boots striking me. Floorboard's hard. This water feeds my entire herd. Without it, the spring cattle drive would be impossible. He ran a hand through his hair. The railroad can't just take what's mine. Mary Ellen watched him, noting how his shoulders bunched with tension. There might be papers, documents from Harold's dealings with Mr. Blackwood. They'd be in his old trunk. Where is this trunk? Joshua demanded. Still at my cabin in town. I haven't had reason to open it since. She trailed off, memories of Harold's final days pressing close. The afternoon brought more worry as ranch hands gathered in the bunkhouse, their angry voices carrying across the yard. Mary Ellen could hear phrases like, "Show them railroad men," and "defend what's ours," drifting through the cold air dot as evening settled. Joshua's agitation grew. He stalked the ranch house like a caged mountain lion, pride and anger radiating from him in waves. Mary Ellen found him in his study, bent over. Property maps. We should pray about this, she suggested quietly from the doorway. Joshua's laugh held no humor. Pray while the railroad steals my water. That's not how the West works, Miss Whitford. Prayer brings clarity when anger clouds judgment, she persisted, and there may be answers in Harold's trunk. Let me fetch it when the weather allows. His response was cut short by the cook's dinner bell. They ate in tense silence, broken only by the twins' attempts at cheerful conversation. Outside, snow began falling harder, thick flakes swirling in the gathering dark dot after supper. Mary Ellen sat with Rebecca and Daniel by the fire, reading stories to distract them from the grown-ups' worry. But she couldn't help noticing how Joshua paced between windows, watching the snow pile deeper in the yard. Near bedtime, she paused at his study door again. Mr. Rollins, I know you're angry, but fighting the railroad could bring worse trouble. He turned, lamplight casting shadows across his face. And what if your husband's papers show he helped them claim my water? What then? The question hung between them like frost. Mary Ellen straightened her spine. Then we face it honestly and seek a just solution. But first, we need those documents. The snow's getting worse, Joshua said, gesturing to the window. Town's already hard to reach. Might be days before anyone can travel safely. Mary Ellen nodded, understanding how the weather trapped them all with their fears and suspicions. Then we wait, and we pray, and we trust God's timing. She saw how her calm unsettled him, his restless energy meeting her steady faith like water. Meeting stone. Without another word, she turned away to prepare the twins for bed. Later that night, Mary Ellen knelt beside her bed, prayers mixing with memories of Harold's final months. Had he signed something in his fever? Made promises she didn't know about? The trunk might hold answers or deeper troubles. Snow continued falling through the darkness, sealing the ranch in white silence. The storm seemed to press the tension deeper into the house, trapping them all with questions that couldn't yet be answered. In the distance, coyotes called to each other across the frozen land, their cries echoing like warnings through the night. The blizzard descended with sudden fury, turning the world beyond the ranch house windows into a whirling wall of white. Inside, warmth from the great stone fireplace pushed back against winter's assault, creating a pocket of refuge from the storm. Rebecca and Daniel sat cross-legged on the rug, playing with wooden animals their father had carved during calmer days. A horse, a bear, and a family of deer moved through imagined adventures in their small hands. Their whispered story-making carried through the quiet room. Mary Ellen kept her hands busy at the kitchen table, darning socks from the mending basket. Every few minutes, her needle paused as she glanced toward Joshua, who stood rigid before the fire. His shadow stretched long across the floorboards. As dark as his mood, the wind rattled the windows, making the lamp flames dance. Mary Ellen rose to add more wood to the stove, her movements gentle and sure. The familiar scent of bean soup simmering filled the air, offering comfort against the storm's rage. "Those railroad men think they can just take what they want," Joshua burst out suddenly, making the twins look up from their play. "Well, they'll find out different when they meet armed ranchers protecting what's theirs." Mary Ellen set down her ladle slowly. "Violence won't solve this, Mr. Rollins." "No?" He turned, firelight catching the anger in his eyes. "Then what will? Letting them steal the water my cattle need. The water that keeps this ranch alive? Your children need their father more than they need water rights," Mary Ellen said softly, but her voice carried steel. "What good is defending the ranch if you end up dead or in prison?" The twins had gone very still, their wooden animals forgotten in their laps. Rebecca's lower lip trembled. Joshua's fists clenched at his sides. "So I should just surrender? Let them take everything I've built? You should remember what matters most." Mary Ellen moved to stand between him and the children. "These little ones don't need a warrior. They need their papa." The words struck him like physical blows. He stepped back, chest heaving, the truth of her statement warring with his pride. "You don't understand," he ground out. "This is all I have to leave them." "No," Mary Ellen replied, her voice gentler now. "You have so much more to give them then. Land and water. You have love, guidance, faith, if you choose those over anger." The heated exchange left them both shaking, though for different reasons. Joshua strode from the room, his boots heavy on the stairs. Mary Ellen knelt to gather the twins close, soothing their fears with quiet words and gentle touches. As night deepened, the storm's fury increased. Wind screamed around the eaves like lost souls seeking shelter. Mary Ellen lit a lamp and gathered the children for their evening prayers. They knelt beside Rebecca's bed, 3 heads bowed together. "Dear Lord," Mary Ellen began, her clear voice rising above the storm, "watch over this house and all who dwell within it. Guide us through troubled waters with your wisdom." The twins' voices joined hers, small and sweet. "Help Papa not be angry. Keep him safe. Help the railroad men be nice." In the hallway, Joshua stopped, arrested by the sound of their prayers. He leaned against the wall, tears burning his eyes as their words washed over him. His children weren't asking for water rights or ranch land. They just wanted their father's heart to soften. The realization of what his pride risked, the peace of his home, the trust in his children's eyes, hit him like a physical blow. He pressed a hand to his mouth, stifling a sob. When morning came, the storm had spent its fury. Sunlight sparkled across unblemished snow, the world transformed into something clean and new. Mary Ellen stood at the kitchen window, watching the ranch hands begin the work of digging out paths to the barn and bunkhouse. "I'll have the sleigh readied," Joshua said from behind her, his voice rough from a sleepless night. "As soon as the road's passable, we'll fetch that trunk from your cabin." She turned to face him, noting the shadows under his eyes, the new lines of worry around his mouth. "The truth in those papers may not be what either of us hopes for. I know," he met her gaze steadily. "But you're right. We need truth more than we need pride right now." Mary Ellen nodded, hope and fear tangling in her chest as she began preparing for the journey into town. Whatever answers lay waiting in Harold's trunk, they would face them together. Morning dawned crystal clear, the storm's fury spent at last. Fresh snow blanketed the ranch, unmarred except for the paths the hands had dug to the barns. The sun cast long blue shadows across the drifts as Joshua hitched his strongest team to the sleigh. Mary Ellen wrapped herself in layers of wool, accepting Joshua's help as she climbed onto the cushioned seat. The leather creaked beneath them. as Joshua took up the reins. With a gentle slap and quiet word, he urged the horses forward. The sleigh runners cut through fresh powder, the sound a steady shush-shush beneath them. Their breath frosted in the air as they traveled, the horses' hooves raising puffs of snow with each step. Few words passed between them, both lost in thought about what they might find. The town lay quiet under its white blanket when they arrived. Smoke rose straight from chimneys in the still air, and a few townspeople paused to watch the sleigh glide past. Mary Ellen sat straighter, refusing to shrink from their stares. Her cabin looked smaller somehow, half buried in drifts. Joshua tied the horses, then helped Mary Ellen wade through knee-deep snow to her door. The key turned stiffly in the frozen lock inside. The air hung heavy with dust and cold. Mary Ellen moved purposefully to the back room where her husband's old trunk waited. Its brass fittings had dulled with time, and dust lay thick across its curved top. "There," she pointed. "We'll need to carry it together." Joshua nodded, taking one handle while she gripped the other. The trunk was awkward, but not too heavy, and together they managed to maneuver it through the door and across the snow. Loading it into the sleigh proved trickier, but Joshua's strength made the difference. The return journey seemed longer, the horses plowing steadily through deepening afternoon shadows. They reached the ranch just as dusk began stealing across the sky, painting the snow in shades of purple and rose. Ranch hands rushed to help with the horses while Joshua and Mary Ellen carried the trunk inside. They settled it near the fire in the study, where lamplight cast a warm glow over the worn leather. Mary Ellen's fingers trembled slightly as she opened the brass catches. The lid creaked as she lifted it, releasing the scent of old paper and memories. Joshua stood nearby, tension visible in every line of his body. She began sorting through the contents carefully, bundles of letters tied with faded ribbon. Her husband. Harold's journal wrapped in oilcloth, documents in manila envelopes gone yellow with age. Each item she set aside with reverence until she found what she sought, her husband's business ledger, its leather cover cracked and worn from use. "Here," she said softly, opening it across her lap. Joshua drew closer, watching as she turned the pages covered in Harold's neat handwriting. Entries about cattle sales and supply purchases gave way to careful notes about railroad dealings. Her voice caught as she began reading aloud. March 15th. Met with railroad surveyors today. They don't suspect I've seen through their scheme. Filed water rights paperwork as planned, not in their name, but in Mary Ellen's. My beloved wife will hold the deed to every drop, though she doesn't know it yet. Perhaps this will protect our land when I'm gone. Mary Ellen's voice failed her. She stared at the pages, hands shaking. All this time she had carried this power without knowing it. Joshua sank heavily into the chair across from her. "You," he swallowed hard. "You hold the water rights?" "To all of it?" She nodded, still staring at Harold's familiar script. "He never told me. He must have." She traced the words with trembling fingers. He must have known he was sick even then. Making plans to protect me. The fire crackled in the hearth, throwing dancing shadows on the walls. Neither spoke for long moments, both wrestling with the weight of this revelation. Mary Ellen held in her hands the power to save or destroy Joshua's ranch, and with it, the future of his children. She looked up finally, meeting his gaze. The lamplight caught the uncertainty in her eyes, the tremble in her lips as she struggled with this newfound responsibility. Joshua stared back, his expression unreadable, knowing his entire world now rested in the hands of the woman he had once deceived. The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken words and choices yet to be made. Outside, snow began falling again. Soft and steady in the gathering night. Dawn painted the eastern sky in watercolor shades of pink and gold. Fresh snow glittered across the ranch yard, though patches of mud showed where it had begun to melt. Joshua stood in the barn, cinching the saddle on his bay, gelding with quick, determined movements. The leather creaked beneath his hands as he checked the straps one final time. "I'm coming with you." Mary Ellen's voice carried clearly from the barn doorway. She held her husband's deed papers carefully wrapped in oilcloth, her expression leaving. "No room for argument." Joshua paused, then nodded slowly. "Reckon that's right. It's your deed after all." He turned to saddle a gentle mare for her while she gathered her skirts and tied on her warmest bonnet. They set out as the sun cleared the mountains, their horses' hooves breaking through crusty snow into the softer layers beneath. The going was slow, but neither rider showed impatience. Mary Ellen sat straight in her saddle, the precious papers tucked securely in her saddlebag. "Those railroad men won't take kindly to being outmaneuvered," Joshua said after a while, his breath frosting in the morning air. "No," Mary Ellen agreed. Quietly, but the truth stands firm, whether men like it or not. The town came into view just as the church bell struck noon. They dismounted at the hitching post outside the Royal Hotel, where the railroad men had taken rooms. Joshua offered his arm to Mary Ellen, and together they climbed the wooden steps to the hotel's entrance. The hotel lobby smelled of tobacco and wood polish. The railroad agent, Mr. Patterson, sat in a leather chair near the pot-bellied stove, while the surveyor, Mr. Wells, stood at a nearby table studying maps. Both men looked up as Joshua and Mary Ellen approached. "Ah, Mr. Rawlins," Patterson drawled, not bothering to rise. "Come to discuss our water rights claim, have you?" "Mrs. Whitford has something to show you," Joshua replied, his voice tight. With controlled anger, Mary Ellen stepped forward, unwrapping the oilcloth with steady hands. "Gentlemen, I believe you'll find these documents of interest." She laid her husband's deed on the table, the official seal clearly visible. Patterson barely glanced at the papers. "What's this supposed to be?" "Legal proof that the water rights you claim belong to me," Mary Ellen said clearly. "Filed and recorded 5 years ago by my late husband." The surveyor snatched up the deed, his face darkening as he read. Patterson rose slowly, his casual manner vanishing. "This is obviously a forgery," he snapped, Joshua's fists clenched at his sides. But Mary Ellen's calm voice cut through the tension. "The original records are at the courthouse," she said. "Shall we verify them together?" A small crowd had begun, gathering in the lobby, drawn by the confrontation. Patterson glanced around, noting the interested faces of townspeople pressed against the hotel windows. "You really think you can stop progress with some widow's fake deed?" he demanded, but uncertainty had crept into his voice. Mary Ellen met his gaze steadily. "I think God gave us this land to steward, not steal. The water rights are mine, legally and morally. You're welcome to check the courthouse records, but you'll find no claim stronger than mine." Her words carried clearly through the now silent lobby. Joshua watched as faces in the crowd shifted from curiosity to admiration. Here was the widow they had scorned, standing firm against railroad money with nothing but truth and courage. Patterson and Wells exchanged glances, their bluster fading as they realized their position. Without a word, they gathered their maps and stalked from the hotel. The crowd parted to let them pass, then pressed closer to examine Mary Ellen's deed. Word spread through town like wildfire. The widow Whitford owned the water rights. She had outfoxed the railroad men. Storekeepers and ranchers' wives who had once whispered behind her back now nodded respectfully as she passed. The afternoon sun had begun its descent when Joshua helped Mary Ellen mount for the ride home. Her deed was safely returned to its oilcloth, wrapping, its power proven before the whole town. As they rode slowly through the melting snow, Joshua struggled to find words for his gratitude. "You could have used that deed against me," he said finally, "after how I deceived you." Mary Ellen adjusted her reins thoughtfully. "Power isn't meant for revenge," she said softly. "It's meant for protecting what's right." Joshua nodded, respect, and something deeper warming his heart as they rode toward home. Yet behind his gratitude lay a shadow of worry. The railroad wouldn't accept defeat easily. He watched Mary Ellen riding beside him, her face peaceful in the fading light, and silently vowed to protect her from whatever retaliation might come. Days crept by at the Rawlins Ranch like molasses in winter. The railroad men had withdrawn to Denver, but their parting words hung heavy in the air. "This isn't finished," they had warned, their threats wrapped in polite smiles. Joshua responded by strengthening the ranch's defenses. He rode the fence lines each morning, checking for damage and reinforcing weak spots. Ranch hands patrolled in pairs, their rifles close at hand despite his growing unease with weapons. Inside the ranch house, Mary Ellen maintained a sanctuary of learning and peace. She guided the twins through their lessons, her steady voice a balm against worry. Rebecca mastered her multiplication tables while Daniel's reading improved daily. Their laughter echoed through the house, a reminder of what truly mattered. When Sunday arrived, the entire ranch attended church together. The wooden pews creaked as the congregation settled in, and Mary Ellen felt the weight of many eyes upon her. But then the preacher rose, his voice carrying to the rafters. "Today, I wish to speak of courage," he began, gesturing toward Mary Ellen. "Not the courage of guns and fists, but the courage of faith and righteousness. We have witnessed such courage in our midst." Whispers that had plagued Mary Ellen for weeks fell silent. Joshua sat straighter beside her, pride of a different sort warming his face. That evening, Joshua gathered his ranch hands around the great fireplace. Flames cast dancing shadows on the log walls as he cleared his throat. "Some of you have asked about fighting the railroad," he began, his voice firm. "But I've learned something from Mrs. Whitford. Violence ain't the answer. We'll handle this her way, with faith and proper channels." The men nodded, respect evident in their faces. Mary Ellen, sitting quietly with her mending, felt tears prick her eyes. Later, when the hands had retired to the bunkhouse, Joshua joined her by the fire. The twins sprawled on the rug nearby, playing with carved wooden horses. "I've been a proud fool," Joshua admitted softly. "Thought wealth and force were the answer to everything. But watching you stand up to those railroad men with nothing but truth and faith." He shook his head. "You've taught me better." Mary Ellen set aside her sewing. "Pride builds walls," she said gently. "Love and humility build bridges. Will Miss Mary stay with us always?" Rebecca's innocent question cut through the moment. Daniel looked up too, hope bright in his eyes. Mary Ellen's cheeks flushed pink in the firelight. She felt Joshua's gaze upon her, saw the same question reflected there, wrapped in something deeper than simple hope. The fire crackled in the silence that followed. Outside, a coyote called lonely across the snow-covered pastures. Mary Ellen's heart fluttered like a bird taking wing, but she held her peace, not yet ready to answer the question that hung sweet and heavy in the air. Spring arrived with gentle warmth, melting the last patches of snow into silvery puddles across the Rawlins Ranch. The morning air held the sweet promise of new beginnings as wagons rolled up the muddy drive, bringing neighbors from miles around. Each family carried overflowing baskets of food, the aroma of fresh-baked bread and apple pies drifting on the breeze. The preacher stood before the assembled crowd near the creek, his Bible open in weathered hands. Sunlight sparkled on the water as he raised his voice in blessing. "Today we celebrate not just water rights preserved, but justice done through faith and patience. Let this stream remind us always that God's provision flows freely." Long tables stretched across the yard, groaning under the weight of roasted chicken, beans, corn pudding, and dozens of pies. Laughter rang out as old grievances melted away like winter frost. Children chased each other between the adults' legs while ranch hands shared stories with townspeople who had once viewed them with suspicion. Mary Ellen moved among the guests, her apron dusted with flour as she passed out squares of golden cornbread. Rebecca and Daniel stayed close, helping her serve while beaming with pride. Their small hands reached eagerly for plates, their faces glowing with joy at being part of such abundance. Joshua stood tall near the main table, his voice carrying across the yard as he called for attention. "Folks, I want to thank you all for coming today. But most especially, I need to thank Mrs. Whitford." He turned to face Mary Ellen, his eyes soft with emotion. "She came to us first as a stranger, showing kindness when we pretended need. Then she taught me that true wealth ain't in cattle or land. It's in humility, faith, and love." Applause burst forth, accompanied by knowing smiles and approving nods. The twins hugged Mary Ellen's waist as their father's words wrapped around them all like a warm blanket. As evening approached and the last guests departed, peace settled over the ranch house. The twins dozed on the rug before the fireplace, their faces peaceful in sleep. Joshua and Mary Ellen sat in the comfortable quiet, watching the flames dance. "Mary Ellen," Joshua said softly, taking her hand, "these past months, you've brought light back to this home. The twins love you like a mother." He paused, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm asking you to stay, not as their teacher, but as my wife. Will you join our family proper?" Tears welled in Mary Ellen's eyes as joy flooded her heart. She nodded, squeezing his hand. "Yes," she whispered. Together, they bowed their heads in prayer, their joined hands a bridge between past and future. The hearth glowed warm, and the table still held plenty, a testament to God's abundance. Where once there had been strangers bound by mere charity, now sat a family united by love and faith, their hearts as full as their home. Thank you for being here. If something in this story stayed with you, I'd love to see you again. Subscribe. And tomorrow, I'll bring you another story crafted with heart.